You're going to absolutely love today's podcast. My guest is Mr. Gordo Byrne. If you're somebody who has lost some of your health in the process of building family and building a career, today is a podcast that will be a reference point for you, a guidebook to find your way back to health. Gordo Byrne had a successful career in financial services before transitioning to become one of the best age group Ironman athletes in the world. Today, he joins me to give us a blueprint, a step-by-step guide on building robust health as we age. Not everybody is ready for this conversation, but if you are ready, get ready to go deep. It's Mr. Gordo Byrne. Gordo Byrne, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Gordo, I want to start off maybe by defining the aging athlete, because I filled out a questionnaire the other day, and the questionnaire had age brackets 18 to 25, 25 to 39, and then 39 to 65. And I was like, oh no, I'm in the 39 to 65 bracket. I was instantly 65. I was like, this is bad. We're going to talk a lot about aging athletes today. What are we talking about? Age range. When would you start to consider someone an aging athlete?
Well, Masters competition for most sports kicks off at 40. I think that's a reasonable ballpark. I think personally, I didn't notice much change until my mid 40s. Around 45, I definitely noticed a shift in the way my body responded to stress. But I think the whole topic of aging athletes is really, it just depends on someone's individual situation. I was somebody that was particularly unfit in my 20s. And so in my late 30s, I was really fit. And so for me, it was, although I was considerably older as a Masters athlete in those, that kind of 38 to 42 window, for me, relative to my lifespan, that was around the fittest I will ever have been. So I think it's individual. And I think we can learn from different individuals' experiences, because I think all of us want to maintain our functional capacity separate from competition, and that just maintaining our functional capacity so we can enjoy our lives across as much of our lifespan as possible. And myself being a competitive athlete through to my early 40s, then taking a break to raise a young family, and then deciding at 53 that I wanted to get back into competitive shape, but in a different sense, because now I'm definitely much older. And just going through that journey, that process of trying to get into competitive shape again, I learned a few things, and I think it might be useful for people, regardless of whether they're competing.
Yeah, and I think this is interesting because our goal, and I think we will be able to achieve it, it's not to give sport-specific advice. Often you see advice and it's quite siloed into, if you're doing triathlon, this is what you need to do. If you're a cyclist, this is what you need to do. If you're a gym bunny, this is what you need to do. Our goal with this is to give more sports agnostic overview of the principles as opposed to the tactics of health. So maybe as a starting point, can you help me identify what are the pillars of this health and fitness that we're trying to build? For me, off the top of my head, I'd be thinking it's strength, it's cardio, it's mobility and balance. Is there more to that?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would add is metabolic health, metabolic fitness. And it's something that sort of lies beneath the surface for most of us until there's a problem. My experience was you can actually be quite healthy, but be out of shape metabolically. And what I mean by that is the ability to produce energy efficiently. And it's an essential part of athletic performance, but it's also a really important part of long-term health. And when I got back into trying to exercise in a more structured manner, I couldn't figure out why I was getting so tired. I was tired all the time at relatively low heart rates. My energy was down, and it was a sign that my metabolic health was poor. Now, this wasn't something my doctor would notice. I mean, I was active every day. I was lifting weights, doing a little bit of cycling, just general health and fitness exerciser. But my metabolic health had declined significantly from when I was an elite athlete, and so that would be another factor that I would add to kind of that list. The other thing I think is endurance athletes will tend to skew all the way towards that cardio silo that you mentioned. So that cardio slice, and they will tend to neglect some of these other things which are important for long-term health. And so it's important to remember that the habits, if you were a competitive athlete, that you built as an athlete, some of those may need to modify across your entire lifespan if you want to continue to be functional and active across your
So,
whole life.
what does poor metabolic health look like? You're saying it manifested itself in low energy, even at low heart rates. But is there blood markers that identified this?
Yeah, you could. I mean, the way I noticed it was just lactate testing. And I noticed that my lactate was going up at efforts that felt very easy to me. And what that meant was, that I was burning a lot of glucose all the time. And so my body didn't have metabolic flexibility. It was always, in effect, burning sugar when I was doing exercise. And so my ability to use fat for fuel had been detrained over this period of time when I was a health and fitness exerciser. And I still appeared healthy, and my blood markers, my lipid profile, and all these other measures of sort of baseline health all looked normal and fine. But my metabolic health wasn't very good. And so the first thing I needed to do was address that, because the fact that I was getting tired, it felt like I was getting too tired for what I was doing, was impairing my ability to kind of do stuff. I was limited in how much I could do each day, and then I would get tired. I need a lot of easy days. And so it set really a ceiling. Now, some people will try and grind through that. But the issue with grinding through it is we're really on a long-term journey, and you might be able to grind through it for a couple of weeks, and if you're mentally tough, a couple of months, but it's not going to be sustainable. So what I had to do was actually back off and go really easy and develop this aspect of my fitness and health.
Would you say metabolic health is a byproduct of having a good balance of the areas, those pillars we identified: strength, cardio, mobility, balance? Or is it something that you would address individually?
So I think it comes to, and okay, so now let's just think about that cardio slice. And when our instincts, and when we listen to people talk about cardio, what they normally say is, the zone 2 or this endurance type training. And then most everybody has their favorite red zone workout, their favorite hard workout. And I think as listeners, we think, oh, it's hard, must be the most important thing. And that's wrong. It's completely on its head. So the hard training for most people is not where we need to focus. We need to focus first on building our metabolic health, this low end training. And what a lot of people will consider their zone 2 training is still too intense for some of those types of efforts. They need to back off even further, and it's a very comfortable form of training. And for volume, we need to be active across our day, and we need to do more than what a lot of folks might tell us. And what I found was it was on the order of an average of about 2 hours a day worth of this easy exercise to kind of move my numbers and make myself more metabolically fit. And it was easy. I mean, my heart rate was down kind of from, I guess, once I warm up, from about 105 to 120 beats a minute in this easy training zone. And that's relative to, say, my max, which would be somewhere around 170, just to put it into context for people. So, up to 50 beats below my max. If somebody was listening, they were trying to figure out, well, how intense is he talking? Now, as an older athlete, my maximum heart rate will tend to be lower, and maximum heart rates don't necessarily, you can't just do that age
Yeah, that don't work.
the formula minus your age. You got to really kind of understand your own situation. But so my situation, about 170 minus 50, that kind of cap, that 120 cap. If I stay under that, that's how easy I need to go. And if I'm doing short bouts of exercise, I think so. When I was in that maintenance program, I might just do 40 minutes or 45 minutes worth of exercise. Because the total duration is short, I could go, it wouldn't feel hard, but I could go 140, 135. It just kind of feels like
Yeah.
I'm working. And in physiology terms, we might call that a zone 3 effort. And you get off the bike, you had a good dose, you feel good. You didn't do so much that it's going to wipe you out, and you can kind of keep going. But that training, that style of training doesn't do anything for my low end, this metabolic fitness that was limiting me uh, in my ability to do more. So, and well, I found that out when I decided I wanted to do more and try and get back into race
I
shape.
bumped into a professional runner friend of mine in a cafe last week. He's a 212 marathon runner. And he was talking exactly about this, that when we have a local park beside us, which is kind of the hub for a community for everyone going for a run, he reckons that 90 to 95% of people that are running actually should just be walking. That they're training just so hard when they're going out for a run. If that's their base level of their cardio for the day, and for me, a lot of that's derived by I watched a recent Peter Attia video where he's talking about zone 2 training. And he's saying, well, you can go out the door and just go for an easy jog, zone 2. Unless you're quite a proficient runner, it's very difficult to stay in zone 2 running. Even as a crossover athlete coming from
So,
years of cycling with a good cardiovascular engine, if I go out the door running, I'm instantly at 130 beats, which is into zone 3 for me.
yeah. So, how to deal with that? So, what I did as a multi sport athlete, I just assumed that if I'm running at any speed, regardless of how it feels, that's an
Yeah.
intense slice of my week. And that was backed up by lactate testing. So as soon as I went from walking to running, my lactate would pop. So I had none of this zone 2 or this green zone. I didn't have any of it running. Same deal. I had a long break from swimming, and regardless of how it felt swimming, that's in my peppy slice. So what it meant was my other stuff on the bike all had to be super easy if I wanted to develop this low end aspect. And that's, I think the bike's beautiful for that, because gears, if you stay flat and you got gears, you're going to be able to do it. So for that first 18 months, it was really humble pie. So it was flat riding, super low heart rate. Meanwhile, I was trying to get back into swimming, try and get back into running. But I told myself, look, no matter what it feels like, it's going to be stressful for you in those sports. And so you're trying to develop all these aspects, this low end, ideally in as many different forms of exercise as you can. Because once you have that, then you've got more flexibility for how you're going to put your week
And
together.
how do you look about the
And that
distribution of
was,
that time? I know people like Stephen Seller have talked about an 80-20 distribution of easy to hard.
yeah. So I was, well, if we include strength training, so say my strength training, so maybe 10% of my week was strength training. And out of that cardio, I might have my heart rate up for 2%. And so it was 88% easy training. And that's a message that a lot of people are unwilling to accept. And I do a really good job of publishing kind of what my results are. And I think part of the reason part of the reason is obviously it's my body. We each get our own results for our own body. But the other thing is I'm willing to just suck it up and do what I think is required. And if I think I got to go easy, I'm going to focus on going easy until I've got that aspect of my fitness sorted. And then I'm going to look at, um, the other aspects. Now, just one thing on Stephen's point, 80-20, and he's modified his advice on that recently, in that he now talks about stressful days. And I think that's a really interesting thing for people to think about. So rather than thinking about stressful sessions or stressful minutes, to think about the days in our lives in a week, say, that are stressful. And this is separate from training. This is all forms of stress. And I think it's a really good way of looking at things, because we can get stress from duration, and we can get stress from intensity, and we can get stress from intensity and duration. So, for instance, if I do a short workout that's very intense, that might not be that stressful for me. I did a ramp test last week. It lasted 10 minutes. I got off. I felt good. Next day, it wasn't stressful, although it was high intensity. So it's the interaction between duration and intensity and other factors, and it's how they interact that creates stress. And I think a better way for listeners to think about their training allocations is stressful and not stressful days.
I think that's a great point.
I think people will, and likewise, if you got something going on, like, I mean, I when I was a younger man, I got divorced. Stress. So every day is a stressful day when you're in a relationship breakup, and as a result, all your training has to be easy. But you're going to talk yourself into thinking you need a release by doing a bunch of hard training or something, because you get a whole bunch of stress hormones and you feel relaxed for an hour or two, but that's not what you need. So you have to balance the stress in all forms if the goal is to improve.
When we talk about stress, do we non-sports specific stress, so we're talking like marital stress, work stress, are we talking about stress, or are we talking about a surplus of stress beyond our ability to deal with that stress?
That's a great way of looking at it. We're each going to have our limits on stress. And so to the extent that we can keep the total stress load down in our lives, so we can control our schedule, I like to front load the stress in my day so I can come down across the day, and then I'll have better sleep, which is, if you like, anti-stress recovery. And to the extent we can set our lives up so that it's relatively predictable and we have downtime within our days, that's going to enable us to put more, if you like, elective stress into it. So it might be a project with work, or it might be training in some cases. It's whatever we want. And so gaining control of our schedules and having a relatively a routine that we're used to, I think is really helpful if you want to get stuff done over long time horizons.
So if somebody's listening to this podcast now and they're buying into this concept that we're talking about, these pillars of health, and they're looking at their week and they're thinking about cardio training now, is there a minimum effective dose that we can talk about, or is this just too individual specific to give recommendations like that?
Well, yeah. Well, I wrote a chapter on that, how to endurance. When people ask me that question, I say it's 12 hours a week. You got to set your life up so you can dedicate 12 hours a week, carve out 12 hours a week for exercise. And that exercise is going to be 2 strength sessions, and all the rest is going to be cardio, agility, balance, those types of mobility. And that's a simple split. So if somebody wants to kind of get things going. So I think you'll often hear now, that advice, if you're a sedentary person, and I've been a sedentary person in my 20s, seems completely unachievable. Seems ridiculous. It seems so far away that I'm not even going to bother. And so to that person, I would say, look, start every day with a win. And what I mean by start every day with a win could be something as easy as just take your blood pressure. That might be how you start your journey. You're going to take your blood pressure every morning. And then the next step you might take is you're going to go for a walk when you feel like it. And every time you go for a walk, I want you to take your blood pressure again. And I want you to see what that walk does to your blood pressure. And that might be enough to get you going and start a positive cascade of daily movement. And that's how I started. Daily movement is how I started in my 20s, just going for a walk and getting it going. Now, eventually I enjoyed it. I saw the positive effects, and it led down many years to ultimately being an elite athlete. But I think it's important just to have something simple, a small hurdle, so you can kind of get going, build the habit, and then you build on the habit. But in terms of where you're trying to get to, 12 hours a week. And where I got myself in that first 18 months was 14 hours a week. And I saw great results from getting myself back to 14 hours a week, an average of 2 hours a day. And then within the 2 hours, you'll have, I'd have one day a week that was longer, and most days would be, kind of around there or a little shorter. Every single week, I would have 2 back-to-back days that were light, so I could make sure that I was recovering, and it gave me space to kind of stay fresh. It wasn't a grind because I knew that I would have these lighter days, and it works really well. I've kept the 2 easy days every single week. As I've ramped up, I've kept that in my week, and it's worked
But I
great for
love
me.
that you gave a realistic number there, because when I talk to friends who are sedentary at the moment, I give a similar number. I would say kind of 11 to 13 hours per week, and it elicits a similar reaction. Like, no, that's not possible. Because I think at one end, there's a culture which I absolutely hate at the moment, and I call it the just culture. And it's the biohacking culture. What if I just get into a cold plunge? What if I just get into the sauna? What if I just take an injection? What if I just do this? It's like, health isn't a just thing. And I think at the far end of
I'd
that,
get rid of all that and just walk. Get rid of all that stuff. Just walk, clean up your nutrition. And by clean up, I mean eat real food. Get rid of all the ultra processed stuff, and as much as possible, try to eat simple, real food. And I think that's a realistic starting point for people. And notice your triggers. I mean, a big trigger for me was booze. If I was drinking, I'd be eating
yeah,
awfully. So the two kind of went together. If I get rid of if I reduce or get rid of the booze, my nutrition cleaned up. And I was thinking back to my 20s there, and so it was simple things. This other stuff is all noise. It's ultimately it's not going to move the number, and it's not going to make you fitter. You got to
yeah.
move.
And there's some really sensible voices out there, I think, that are pushing the non-glamorous and correct agenda, like yourself, Alan Cousins, Iñaki Del Parra. Like, I love following you guys because it's a realistic appraisal of how much we actually do need to be moving. That, sitting in a cold plunge for 60 minutes just isn't going to cut it.
So, well, I mean, if you like it, I've got no problem with it if you like it, as long as you're moving in the rest of your life. I mean, you got the rest of the day to do that stuff, but just don't fool yourself into thinking that that stuff is going to be what moves it for you. Likewise, the stuff that's really, really hard and really, really difficult, it costs you energy. It doesn't necessarily build you up. So if you're going to do that stuff, use it sparingly. Really what you got to do is you got to get to a protocol that you can initially, I used to say, set yourself up a week that you think you can do, no problem, 15 weeks in a row. So that's like 105 days. And then see if you can do it and give yourself a score out of 105. And, if you're not getting an A, if you're not like 90% or higher, you got to lower your hurdles. And so it's a case of finding what's going to be sustainable and then noticing the things that knock you off track. And then, those are the things you want to remove as opposed to adding extra stress. So get yourself to a position where you can just kind of roll this week quite comfortably. And then you just do that. And then you'll start to see the benefits. Now, something people should also be aware of. Maybe initially, the first couple of weeks, you're kind of all fired up and you feel like things are going great. Well, my own experience was that not much really happened for a year. So I was doing my 14 hours a week, and I'm rolling along and dealing with all the other stuff. I got like COVID. I got COVID 1 month, and so that was sort of a setback. And then I had something else another month. These are all normal things. You just kind of keep going. And it took a year until I was able to, through my testing, say, okay, I've definitely improved myself. And so these time horizons are relatively long. Now, that's different than, say, something like strength training. You get in the gym and you train consistently for a few months, you are going to notice gains much more quickly. But I had been very consistent with my strength training when I was taking this break for family. And so my strength was fine. I mean, it just kind of kept rolling. If anything, I did less strength once I added more cardio back because I wanted to have more energy to focus on my
But
cardio
it is
training.
quite intuitive. If someone listening to the podcast now looks in the mirror and they don't like what they see, you didn't get there with 1 week of bad decisions, 1 month of bad decisions. So you're not going to reverse out of that position in 1 week of good habits or 1 month of good habits. Good and bad habits take time to compound.
Yeah. And the other thing is, honestly, what you're shooting for is stability. Stability in weight. If you feel like you're overweight, get yourself to a situation where you can exercise consistently, have stable weight. Because something that I dealt with as an elite, as well as just a recreational athlete when I was younger, is that I was always going up and down. I was either kind of always gaining or kind of losing. And it really wasn't until, I don't know, say the last 15 years that I was able to kind of just say, well, look, I'm just going to try and be stable here. And I'm just going to kind of go along and have stability in weight. And I think that's something that you're shooting for, not this desire for chronic weight loss. I don't think that works, and I don't think that's particularly healthy long
No,
term.
especially when you're motivated at the start, I think it's easy to get into that negative energy balance because you try to do everything at once. You're like, I'm going to start this new exercise plan, and I'm also going to cut calories chronically. And that ends up
Mm,
ultimately, like I've gone times I raced over on the bike in France, and France is a toxic relationship with food. You'd be doing 6, 7 hour rides and getting no food when you came in. And there's only so many times you can go to that well. And you've just hit such a
mm,
negative energy balance that you can hardly get out of bed in the morning. Motivation is on the floor.
yeah, yeah, it can be a tough thing. So another thing I want to talk about on the aging athlete is there's a lot of folks talk about VO2 max, and I just want to put some things out there for somebody that might be listening, because when I was an elite, we did a lot of testing of me, physiological testing. So I have quite good data from when I was quite speedy. And last week, I went to Finland at the Olympic Training Center, and we redid a series of tests. And so I have data now that compares where I was at my peak with where I am now. Now, one of the things we will hear quite commonly is that VO2 max declines
Yeah.
with age. Okay, nothing surprising there. And it declines, the figure that I see banded about is about 10% a decade. So say 1% a year. And that's partially to do with loss of muscle mass, but also it's got to do with many of us gain weight. And so if you're looking at VO2 measured per kilo, you're getting a double whammy, right? You're losing your muscle and you're kind of putting on a little bit of fat. So the ratio, you get hit twice. Now my weight is relatively stable. I was never a super light elite athlete. I was lean, but I wasn't light. My body composition is a little different, but not too much. But if we just focus on the absolute number, so that would be absolute liters, and I've gone down by about 10%, round numbers, from my peak to my mid 50s. So that's a lot less than we might expect looking at the population data. So I've been considering, well, why is that? And so that's something that I think people should bear in mind if they want to maintain their functional capacity, is how might I be able to maintain what I've got as I get older? And the key thing, I think, is consistent strength training. So not trying to bulk up and not trying to kind of get huge or anything, but just maintain that muscle mass. And it's something that I've been really good with my entire life, is just having a little bit of strength training. And then every so often, usually either in the winter, I would have a focus block where I would try to greatly increase my strength over, say, 6 to 8 weeks. And then about every 5 years, something would come up in my life. So it might be the pandemic, or it was the birth of our first child. And it was a period in my life where all of a sudden I didn't have much time. And so I was like, all right, well, what can I make progress on? Well, I can make progress on lifting, because 3 1-hour sessions in the
So
gym a week can have great results, and it doesn't take a lot of time. So that's a neat thing about strength training, is the bang per minute can be really big. And so for a block or a phase or a period of time, you can kind of boost that. And one of the things folks will tell us is we can't gain lean body mass after 50. Now, my experience with that is I can, and I could, and I did during the pandemic. I focused on my strength training. I got a home gym, and I had great results. So I think part of this maintenance of VO2, maintenance of our overall aerobic engine, is by limiting these muscular losses that we all experience gradually over our lives. And that's, I think, a very important long-term thing. So somebody listening might think they don't need strength training for wherever they are in their life now. That could be right. And you might not need it in 5 years' time. But I promise you, in 25 years' time, you will be happy that you did 2 half-hour sessions every week, even though you felt like you might not need it.
Yeah,
There.
yeah. I think we're in an age as well where we can be super hyper obsessed with, well, show me the study, show me the data. With stuff like strength training, there it's loads of data out there, but I still lean on anecdotal. How does it make me feel? If I strength train twice a week, I just feel more robust in everything. I feel more energized. I feel like my posture, like I sit a bit better. I feel like I walk more confidently. I think it has benefits beyond the documented benefits.
Yeah, and the benefit, the documented benefits are a lot better now. 20 years ago, we used to have these arguments over does strength training matter or not, and everybody would be like, well, there's no proof it works. Now there's plenty of proof it works in terms of movement economy, injury prevention, the ability to do more work. Now that said, young athletes who are naturally anabolic, I'd agree. You probably don't need it for your sport at that moment of time. But at some point, if you want to continue as a master's athlete or you want to have outstanding functional performance when you're 60 years old, which is a goal of mine, you're going to need to maintain that muscle mass and maintain that overall bodily function. And strength training has a role to play in that over the long term. So things that might not make sense for us when we are younger will make increasing sense for us as we get older. So in the thinking about the aging athlete, all because you rightly ruled out something in your 20s or early 30s doesn't mean you need to continue to rule it out as you age and become a master's athlete.
How do you think about planning your week? Do you look at your calendar and plan training first and then other obligations slot in around that? Or do you plan? I'm thinking even from a stress balance point of view, if you have particularly stressful obligations in work, do you try and slot them in and then build recovery days or easier sessions in on those days?
So it first, one of the first things I do when I'm working with an athlete is I say, look, lay out your standard week for me in terms of the stuff that's routine. And what we try to do is we try to just create slots within that week for training, and we don't necessarily specify what goes into the slots. So what we have is we try and carve out a week, and the week has time for training, all the different things that this person wants in their life. And I think that works well for a lot of people. For me, I like to have my stress in the first part of the day, whatever form that is. I like to get it done. And then the second part of the day is really for admin and chilling out. Admin meaning the tasks that we all have to do in our lives, but they don't require a whole bunch of creativity. They just require kind of working through them. And that seems to work well. Now, if we think about a total week, something that with these two back-to-back easy days, for somebody that is a working athlete, Sunday, Monday works well because the Sunday easier day is about keeping your life in order. And then the Monday easier day is about getting a good start to the week and getting ahead on those non-training work type obligations, get your work stuff done. And that can be very sustainable for people. And just whatever routine works for you, if it's working, don't vary it. And I think a lot of folks and programs put unnecessary variation into where the training happens, and things are always changing week to week. And that requires mental energy and a renegotiation with everybody that's in your week with how you're going to set your week up. So if you get rid of that and you just create this standard week structure where you've got your slots and you just repeat the week, that's a very sustainable thing. Now, for somebody getting started, the easiest thing to do is just start every day with training. Whatever you're going to do, start the day with it. And then anything else, if you get another session in later, that's a bonus. But when my life was totally crazy with like kids, work, and everything, that's what I did. So it's an hour every morning. It's going to be strength or cardio, depending on the day. And that's it. And I know I've got that done. And I know if I did that, I was doing what it took to get through that period of my life. And I got through the period, and then I had more time and I could get more, I commit more to sport, but at a later date. I was just really about keeping my options open, maintaining
I
my
love that.
health.
A lot of what we talked about, nutrition underpins it. And there's few areas I can think of that have so much division as nutrition. It's become tribal. You're paleo on one side, you're keto on the other, you're vegan, you're carnivore. How do you approach fueling to hit macro and
Okay.
micronutrients
So,
across a week where you're balancing conflicting demands on your time, like training and family work?
all right. So let's let's deal with this in the concept of the aging athlete. So something I want to share with your listeners is inside of every one of us is probably an aspect of our personality that might be a little anorexic. I call those a depleter. And we've also got an aspect of our personality that's a bit of a glutton, so a feeder. And so we've got these different trends, and some people tend to skew one way or the other. And depending on our stress load, you watch what happens when you get stressed. So if you're really stressed, are you one of these people that claims to forget to eat? Or are you one of these people that like eats the whole closet, like, wipes out the pantry when you're stressed out, a stress eater? So eaters and depleters. It's an interesting thing to notice in yourself. Now, I happen to be on the eater camp. I'm not much of a good depleter. Don't like being hungry. Never, all this depletion training that you hear people talking about never appealed to me. Didn't work for me. I was like, I could feel it in my body that this is not the way to improve. But you need to be aware of that, because if you happen to be a depleter, 20, 30 years of depletion, you're going to be speeding up these muscle losses. And as a young athlete or a young person, you'll get away with it. You might actually even boost your VO2. You might go faster uphill because you're going to have a relatively small frame. But at some point, all these little muscle losses are going to come home to roost, and you're going to lose this functional capacity at some point in middle age, depending on where you happen. But definitely by the time you hit 60. So you're not going to be maintaining your overall engine. So that's something to be aware of. Some of the habits that we might have had as a young person or as a young athlete, or if we were in a sport that was very weight conscious, we need to get past those habits because we don't want to impair our long-term health by depleting. So that's just a little spiel on that, because I think it's really important for people to understand. Likewise, if you were somebody that's a bit of an eater, I can gain fat very quickly, gain weight very quickly. It's kind of a pain, but that's a sign of being naturally anabolic. And that's part of the way that I'm able to maintain my muscle mass is, eating, fueling the burn, being motivated to do stuff. So it can be a positive if you get your nutrition straight. Now, the key thing with getting my nutrition straight is energy dense foods. So the sports nutrition, particularly sports drink, I can drink a ton of calories with sports drink. So I need to watch my liquid carbohydrate intake. Now, somebody else, they might have something like, I don't know, high energy food might be ice cream or pizza or, these types of foods. And then rather than me, I'm kind of binary. I just have to eliminate them. My wife's way better with portion control. And what she tells herself is, I'm going to focus on portion control because that lets me have a little bit, but I never did very well with portion control. So I didn't bother with that. But I would say that is the key thing, is understand the energy dense inputs. And then what you want to do is replace those, because you got to eat. So you got to replace those with things that fill you up, give you a sense that you've eaten, but don't necessarily have a whole bunch of calories coming along with them. Salads, veggies, that type of stuff. Because I've always felt not eating it's not a strategy that's going to work for the long term. So you got to get a really clean
And are you
nutrition
just
profile.
eating according to desire, or are you eating based on, okay, here's my outputs for the day, let me measure my inputs for the day, and you're weighing stuff and it's going in MyFitnessPal and it's gone down the beautiful mind rabbit hole?
So the counters, if somebody's a counter, I would say you got to understand what you're trying to prove to yourself, because you're counting because you're trying to prove something to yourself. So what are you trying to prove? I don't need to count. I'm not trying to prove myself. I'm trying to keep myself strong, and I'm trying to keep myself fueled. And if I'm overfueling, it becomes obvious. I gain weight, and that's it. I mean, it becomes clear. I think the energy that people spend counting food and worrying about food and all this other stuff would be better spent on something productive, like, I don't know, going for a walk, doing some mobility, uh, starting a podcast, writing an article. I mean, basically anything, reading a book, rather than sort of counting your calories and trying to document it. I also think that the our bodies are complex systems, and to think that we can figure out what's going to happen in our bodies by simply measuring a few of the inputs, I I think it's not. I don't think it's. I don't think we're able to do it. I think what you'll find is you need to just try and simplify as much as possible, because it's difficult to see. Now, I do believe in kind of like calories in, calories out, that kind of thing, the balance. But what I also think is it's really, really difficult to understand what we're truly burning. When the scientists try and do it, I mean, they put people in sealed rooms and they're like measuring the gases in the rooms and all this stuff. So if you're trying to do it in your regular life by doing guesstimates on your food, it's not going to be all that accurate. And again, what are you trying to tell yourself? Are you when I've tried to measure things, I was usually trying to tell myself either I could eat more, it was okay to eat more, and so that was great. But then I started gaining weight and then be like, okay, well, it's not okay to eat more. Or you're somebody that's a depleter and you're measuring to try and prove to yourself that you're eating enough, but you're not, because you're a depleter and you probably know that. And so you need to boost the way you eat. Now, some people, I've got friends that are depleters, and when they measure, it helps them actually eat enough. So I wouldn't rule it out for every situation or every athlete. If you're somebody that struggles to eat enough in your life and a little bit of structure on your input helps keep you more healthy, I'm all in favor of that. But I think for most of us, it's a distraction from the things that actually drive performance. And with nutrition, what drives performance is having a core nutrition strategy, whatever that means for you, of real food. And I don't really care what type of food it is, all macros, however you want to get your macros. And you figure out that works for you. That's your core nutrition strategy. You roll that forward. On the days you're more active, that's when you're going to need to bring in some sports nutrition. And that's it. The days you're less active, you're just going to eat your regular kind of meal plan. And it's nice and simple. And you just sort of do it that way. And I find that works really well for people. And then each of us is going to have certain foods, a small list, that if we start eating them, we're going to gain fat. And get a hold of what your list is, and then just either eliminate those things, replace them, or use portion control, depending on the type of person you
Why I
are.
love this conversation, and my real key takeaway point of it is, if you change the lens you're viewing the world through, so you're talking about calorie count, and what your approach to it is, well, if I just sit back and I look at it through a wider, longer term lens, is my weight going up or is my weight going down? So many of us are impatient that we need that immediate feedback. But when you zoom out on all this stuff, like, yeah, maybe you can push through the hard training this week, maybe you can push through next month. But if you look at it through the longer term lens again, you're not going to be able to push through forever. Your motivation is ultimately going to not get you across that hurdle, and it becomes toxic at some point. So just changing that lens in how we view every aspect of our training, health, and fitness, it changes an awful lot.
Hmm. Yeah, stability. I've always tried to point myself and my athletes to a protocol that's going to be stable. I've found that leads to great progress. If my training's stable, my sleep's stable, my nutrition's stable, my emotional life is stable, then I'll be able to kind of move the ball, forward.
Gordo Byrne, thank you very much for your time.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please click up here. There's another video I know that you're absolutely going to love. And we're just getting started, so subscriptions really matter. Click over here and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our amazing upcoming guests.